We are continuing our study in the life of Abraham. Going to be winding it up here soon. So as we kind of head into it, a couple more weeks and we're done with that. And then actually, I've been here now 31 years as pastor, and so about 10 years into this thing, I started looking at it going, you know what, if somebody's been here in the church for a long period of time, I want to make sure that they've had a lot of exposure to Bible teaching. So I set up way back then an idea that I would preach a pattern of messages. So normally what I do is I preach an Old Testament series, then I go to a New Testament series, and then I'll do a Life of Christ series. So I kind of rotate that off and on. So I put those three together. And I was in a seminar last year, and one of the things that they talked about was as we're going forward as a culture, one of the things that is happening among Christian people is there's really a lack of an understanding of Bible theology. In other words, people, they may know the stories, but they really don't understand the Bible principles. And they really don't understand the theological. So what I did was I sat down and kind of worked it through. So now I'm going to start actually a 4-deal pattern where I'm going to do an Old Testament, New Testament, Life of Christ, and then I'm going to go into and I know this sounds really boring, I'm going to go into a theology deal, a series on theology. So actually where we're headed next is we're going to take so if you come here for the next 10 years, you'll actually have a theological basis for what the Bible teaches. And theology, don't get scared of it. When we talk about theology, the theology most people know is the study of the last things. Everybody loves Revelation and loves all that. And so that's about the depth of most people's theological understanding. But we're actually going to walk through theological principles. And so the first one we're going to start out with is actually what we call bibliology, which is the idea of the Bible. We're going to understand how we got it. We're going to understand how we interpret it. We're going to understand how we do those kinds of things. And there'll be a practical aspect to it for you as well. But what I have found is that your theology ultimately will dictate your life's decisions, whether you realize it or not. So a good, solid theology will help you as you go through life. For instance, what do you really believe about God? Have you ever thought that through? What do you really believe about the Holy Spirit? What do you believe about salvation? Do you understand the doctrine of salvation? What that means when we talk about you're accepted in Christ, that you are redeemed and you're reconciled and you're sanctified and you're set apart. What does all that mean? Well, that shapes how you make decisions. So that's kind of where we're going to head before the end of the year. So anyway, and then we'll get into Christmas season. But give you a ballpark, that's where we're headed. This morning we're going to be talking about somewhat the life of Abraham, but yet it's really also the beginning of the story of Isaac. What you need to understand is that when we get into this part of Genesis, there are now large gaps of time between the chapters. So, for instance, last week we talked about Abraham and Isaac, the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, willing to sacrifice Isaac. Isaac's 20 years old. The next chapter, which is finding a wife for Isaac, Isaac's 40 years old. 20 years have passed. Sarah passed away, and so now all of a sudden Abraham's looking at his son and he's realizing he's not married and we need to go find him a wife. So that's the story of how Isaac finds Rebekah and how that story comes in. Now we're not going to read the whole chapter because this happens to be the longest chapter in the book of Genesis, 67 verses. So, if we do that, we'll be here the rest of the time just reading the chapter. So we're going to start at the beginning, and I'm going to tell you the story, and then I'm going to jump way to the end, all right? So here we go. It starts out, now Abraham was very old. The Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to his senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will get a wife for my son, yet you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites. Now remember, he's in a foreign land, Canaanites. He's from Ur of Chaldees. So he said, among whom I am living. but you will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. Now the servant asked him, what if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I take your son back to the country from where you came from? Make sure that you do not take my son back there, Abraham said. The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me to my father's household and my native land and spoke to me and promised me an oath, saying, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son there. Now, if the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from the oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of the master Abraham, swore an oath to him concerning this matter. Now, the servant then left, taking with him 10 of his master's camels, loaded with all kinds of good things from his master. He set out for Amran Naphtha and made his way to the town of Nahor. He had the camels kneel down near the well outside the town. It was toward evening, the time that women went out to draw the water. Then he prayed, Lord, God of my master Abraham, make me successful today. Show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring. The daughters of my townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a young woman, please, let down your jar that I may have a drink, that she says, drink, and I'll water your camels too. Let her be the one that you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, and was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The woman was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever slept with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. Long story short, she then offers to feed his camels. He then tells her the story. He then goes back to her family. Her family says, hey, this sounds like a good deal, but let's give it a little bit of time. Servant says, nope, we need this to happen now. Family turns around and says, Rebekah, what do you want to do? And Rebekah says, I'll go with the guy. So they go with the guy. She goes with the guy right then and there. They all head back. They come back, and now, verse 66. Then the servant tells Isaac all that he had done. So he comes up, Isaac there, he tells him everything. Isaac brought her in the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. All right? So that's the story. Let's talk about a couple of odd things in the passage, just so we get it out of the way. The idea of the whole oath thing and hand under the thigh. So I don't have time to get in the detail. I don't want to get in the detail. Just let me say this. Be very grateful in 2023 that we make a deal by shaking hands, okay? That's all we'll get into. There's a whole cultural thing, all right? What's interesting is a couple of odd things about this passage that are really unique. This is the last time Abraham speaks before he dies. It's the last recorded conversation we have of Abraham before he passes away. He is mentioned in the Bible of talking one time after this. And that is when Jesus tells the story of the rich man and Lazarus. And Abraham speaks and talks to the rich man and says, you've received many good things and da-da-da-da. So the next time that we have Abraham speaking is actually in the context of eternity, not in the context of living here on this earth. What's interesting here is that Isaac is 40 years old, and Daddy's going to get him a wife. We'll talk about the significance of that in a second. What's also interesting is Rebekah is given the freedom to choose Isaac here. Because actually, when you go into the story, they look at Rebekah and say, what do you want to do? And she says, I'll go with him. You have to understand the ask. The ask here is, you're going to relocate to a country you've never been to a person you've never met, and you're going to live in an area that you don't know anything about. So this is a big ask. This is a big ask on her part. So as we get into the story, those are just a couple of things. The dad when Sarah passes away, Abraham feels this responsibility to get Isaac a wife. Normally he would have been married long before this time, but now he's 40 years old. Abraham looks at him and goes, I need to get him a wife. But what's significant, I think, is that he trusts Dad to do this in this story. The servant takes a ton of provisions with him. 10 camels is a substantial amount of camels. And we'll get into why that plays out so important in this story in a minute. But he really does trust God in this process. I think there's 3 great lessons for us in this story. I think there's a lesson, first of all, about parenting. I think there's a second lesson about marriage. And I think there's a third lesson about love. And so I want to hit on those this morning as far as applying them to our life. The first idea is the idea of parenting. I think it is significant here, first of all, that Abraham feels this incredible responsibility for his son to help him get a wife. What I think is also incredibly significant in this story is that he is adamant about a few things. There are a few things that are non-negotiable in Abraham's life when he talks about finding a wife for my son. The first is, she's not a Canaanite, she believes like we believe. In other words, as he looked at his son, he said, the one thing that is a non-negotiable here is, you go get me a godly woman for my son. I can't stress enough, moms and dads, how important this is that you impart this to your kids. And I mean, you impart this to your kids from day one. My kids will tell you growing up, when they'd say, hey, Dad, I met this girl, they knew the first question I would ask. Every time. She could have been ugly, it didn't matter what she looked like, it didn't matter how much money she had, it didn't matter what kind of world she came from. My first question was always the same: is she a Christian? Because if she's not, I'm done with this conversation. Because I know the value of having somebody who has the same belief system you do. It's reiterated over and over again in the New Testament. I'm telling you, this is a big deal to me as a parent. This was a big deal, is imparting that idea of, you tell me about her walk with God. Let's start there. The other stuff is all incidental as far as I was concerned. We're going to start right there. Is she a Christian? Does she love God? And listen to me. Okay, so I get really adamant about this, so let me be really, really adamant about this. Kids, listen up. Let's just think of this thing through for a second. You're a Christian. You put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ. You know that when you die, you're going to spend eternity in heaven. Okay? Why would you consider somebody who you say, I want to love you with all my heart, soul, mind, I want to be with you, and I want to spend all my time with you, but when we die, I'm going to heaven and you're not? Tell me how that makes sense if you really, genuinely, passionately want to love and follow Jesus Christ. Everything else should be a non-negotiable. I mean, everything else, you can't get past that. Why do you want to say, I will love you and I want to be with you, but when we die, we're going to go 2 separate places? That makes no sense. And Abraham said, when you go and find a wife for my son, Isaac, do not take it from the Canaanite people. These are pagan people who don't worship God. You go back to our land where those people follow God, where those people love God, and you get somebody from there. That's how adamant he was about this. Moms and dads, listen to me. You have to instill in your kids. I'm not saying they will follow you, but it's not your job to get them to follow you. Okay, so back this up for a second. We instilled Christian principles in our boys. What they did with it was their call. I'm not responsible for what they do with it. That's between them and God. I'm going to stand before God accountable for what I taught them. That's my accountability as a parent. What they do is their business. They have to stand before God and give an account for that. So, people look at me and go, oh, you must be great parents. No, I messed up so bad, They turned out, and I tell people this, they turned out the way they turned out because of the choices they made. It's between them and God. And I want to instill in this. Your goal as a parent is to instill Christian value. That's what Abraham does here. In fact, what's interesting to me is the amount of prayer that is put in it. He looks at his servant and he says, you know what? You need to know God will lead you to the right person. I'm convinced that you just need to go and you just need to trust me. And he literally trusts God's timing on this thing. Parents, what amazes me in this passage is Isaac had the respect and trust of Abraham. And Abraham, in other words, he had such a relationship with him that he trusted him. I mean, we saw this 20 years ago when he willing to sacrifice him. Hey, Dad, where's the sacrifice? Don't worry, God will provide. Hey, son, I need you to get on the altar. Okay. You need to earn the respect of your kids. They don't need another friend. They don't need another buddy. They can get those at school all day long. You get one shot at parents. And you want to do everything you can to have their trust and their respect. Doesn't mean they agree with you, but you have their trust and respect. Abraham has the trust and respect of Isaac. Let me talk to kids here just for a second. And by kids, I'm talking about usually junior high to about college, that age group. So listen to me just for a second. I understand, particularly when you get about that 10th grade year, your parents become clueless. They have no idea what the world's about. They get everything wrong, and at the ripe age of 16, you have this incredible, vast amount of knowledge that you are so much smarter than they are, okay? I get that, all right? And they're clueless, okay? It's like they don't even live on the same planet you live on. I mean, I get that, okay? So let's just put that aside for a second. And let's just talk about it from a common sense point of view. You are 15 or 16 years old. You've never been 20. But they have. You've never been 25. They have. You've never been 30. They have. You've never been 35, but they have. We're going to stop there. You get the idea. The point is this. They have life experience you don't have yet. They have that experience. They have been there. You go, well, they don't know anything about what's going on in this world. Maybe not, but you know what? They have been where you are headed. They know what it's like to deal with love. They know what it's like to deal with finances. They know what it's like to go get a job. They know what it's like to have car trouble. They know what it's like to take tests. They know what it's like to fail tests. They know they have that experience that you don't have yet. So, doesn't common sense say maybe they actually could know what they're talking about? They've been down that road. And so often what I watch is 15, 16, 17-year-olds, well, I'm going to go listen to my friends. How dumb do you have to be? Because all they have is 15 years worth of experience. And by the way, 3 of that, somebody else was helping them go to the bathroom. 1 or 2 of those years, they couldn't even feed themselves. And you've got people in your life, let me put it this way. If you're 15 years old right now, I've lived 4 of your lifetimes. You think I just might have a little more experience? Because common sense would say, yes. And Isaac is at 40, realizes, I'm going to trust Dad. I'm going to listen to Dad. When my wife and I were dating, we had dated, I don't know, before I met Charlie, how long we dated? Like a year and a half? 2 years, something like that? A year and a half? we figured that we were kind of going to make this together. So she said, I want you to meet my dad. And she said, now you need to know something. Now here's what was going to happen, okay? They picked us up in Greenville, South Carolina. We were going to drive back to Virginia, and I was going to stay there for, I don't know, like a week. And then I was going to go back to school, and I was staying there for summer school and working there and stuff like that. She said, you need to understand that. Now, you want pressure. Here's pressure. You need to understand. When my dad meets you, my dad's going to make a decision right then and there. And you're in or you're out. And if he decides you're out, we're done. She said, our relationship's not going to go any further than this. She said, you're out. Now, I'm sitting here going, so if I'm out, I got to live in that house with him for a week. Because he was my ride there. And fortunately, the car broke down on the way out there, on the way back, and I helped him fix it. So I was in, okay? I was in. I wasn't some just dumb preacher kid. I could actually work on a car, which he was a painter, so for him it was all about using your hand. He didn't care much for education. His focus was, are you a hard worker? And he figured, you know what, if this guy can help me fix a car, then he's good enough for my girl. Now, when I went to him and said, after we'd been married, I want to take your girl out of the state of Virginia, and no Vaughn had ever left the state of Virginia, let's just say it took me a long time to get back into his good graces. But I eventually did, because he just didn't, and he knows I'd treat her right. So I was okay with that. But there's something about the idea of, you know what, build that relationship with your kids to earn that trust and that kind of respect. One of the things that you see in the story that I think is unique is that it sounds crazy, but when he asks about feeding the camel, he's actually looking for character. We'll get into that in a second. So we talked about parenting. Let's talk about marriage. One of the things that you see in the life of the servant and you see in the life of Abraham and the way this thing plays out is it was all about character. In other words, a great marriage starts with you. Not the other person, it starts with you. In this case, it starts with Abraham praying for his son's marriage, his servant going to find him a wife, and the servant setting up a whole list of character issues that he's looking for. So let me walk you through the thinking behind this whole thing. First of all, you have this idea of the servant going down, and one of the first things the servant does is he prays. Here's a question. Where did he learn that? Where did the head servant learn how to pray? From Abraham. One of the things that you see in the story is the significance of prayer. Parents, listen to me. I started praying for the spouse that my kids were married when they were born. So when they finally said, Dad, this is the girl I want to marry. And I was very fortunate. We have been very incredibly fortunate. First of all, our kids are close. Secondly, our kids like each other. So I have two daughters, bonus daughters, who love each other, and they're like sisters. And I'm incredibly fortunate enough that everybody lives close to us, and we still all get along. And I'm incredibly fortunate enough that I got to do both weddings. And I've told the girls this over and over again. And I said it at their wedding. You are an answer to 20 plus years of prayer. You are the person that God prepared long before you ever knew it for these boys, because we don't want them anymore. They're all yours. In fact, I tried to talk them out, and both of them can tell me. So when they start complaining, I look at them and go, did I not tell you? It's your problem, not mine. He's all yours now. And we joke about it, but the reality of it is we've been praying for them for years. So those of you who got little 2-year-olds, you need to be praying for their spouses now. that God would prepare them, that God would take care of them, that God would, you say, really? Yes. Because Rebekah was an answer to prayer. And when Abraham's servant goes to find Rebekah, he does some incredibly specific things. One of the things that he does is he goes to the well. Now, I don't know what your idea of Rebekah is, okay? Everybody has these mental pictures, like she looks like Barbie or something, okay? She ain't no Barbie. She's beautiful, but she's also a pretty beefy woman. I can tell you that right now, okay? First of all, you need to understand, until about the 1800s, okay, what we call beauty today, skinny women and all that kind of thing, those were sick people prior to the 1800s. Seriously. I mean, look at art through history. Okay, you see very few skinny women in art. Okay, there's a reason for that. They were considered. Some of you are going, awesome. I'm just living in the wrong century. But I mean, seriously, because, and here's how I know. Let me explain to you how I know. He goes there driven by her character, not her looks. Here's how I know that. First of all, he goes to the well. And he goes to the well in the evening. And the Bible's very specific about this. Here's what that tells me. You know who's at the well in the evening? Hard-working women. By the way, hard-working, moral women. The immoral women came during the day because they didn't want to be around everybody else because everybody else talked about them. So these are the ladies who have the respect of the community. That's the first thing that he's after. Secondly, they're there to do what? They're there to get water. In this culture, water was carried in clay pots. So it's got some heft to it as it is, right? Secondly, the clay pots, so let's just take a small clay pot holding 5 gallons. Think of a 5-gallon bucket, okay? You got a 5-gallon bucket of water. Water is 8 pounds per gallon. You got 40 pounds of water in a clay pot. Clay pots aren't light. So you've got roughly about 60 pounds, 50 to 60 pounds that she's carrying up on her shoulder. Barbie ain't going to do that. Barbie's going to go try to find somebody else to do it. Ken, will you come here and carry my water? That's what's going to happen. So she's got some muscles to her. Secondly, the prayer is very specific. When I ask somebody for a drink, I want them to give me a drink. And then I want them to offer to water my camels. Okay? Follow that? It was common practice to go, sure, I'll get you a drink of water. Here's a glass of water. I got 5 gallons. Here's a cup. Here's an 8-ounce glass. Okay? Or a scoop or ladle or whatever they got. Camels, on the other hand, nobody in their right mind would have offered to give the camels something to drink, and here's why. The average camel drinks between 25 and 50 gallons of water. So you think about this for a minute. How many of them were there? 10. At the minimum, what she was signing up for was to haul 250 gallons of water, 5 gallons at a time. This was no Barbie. She's going to, so if you do the math, again, 250 gallons of water, let's say 5 gallons per pot, that's 50 trips. Nobody in their right mind is going to make that offer unless you're a hard worker, unless you have incredible compassion for the animals, and you see past the circumstances and not just about the servant, but you see the need way past the servant. This guy's looking for character. Hear me out, kids. Beauty fades. People change. When I got married, I was half the size I am now. We won't get into all that, okay? People look at me now and go, did you live in you look anorexic. I was 145 for a long, long time. It's been a long time since I've seen 145. Well, I see it. It just flies past the scale. But I mean, seriously, it's one of those deals where it changes. It changes. I give a hard time. Laura cuts my hair. I give Laura a hard time. I say, when I started coming to you, my hair was thick and black. And I said, now it's thin and there's not as much of it. I said, I think you're messing with my head. I said, because I didn't look like this before I started coming to you. But the reality of it is it changes over time. It changes over time. And one of the things that you see is he's looking for character. He's looking for a godly woman who has a servant's heart, who's a hard worker, who's passionate, who sees past the need to somebody else. He's looking at the kinds of things that don't change. And this is what I would say to you. Those are the kinds of things you need to look for in a spouse. One of the things that I think is amazing in this is the amount of time and money and commitment that he made. He travels a long way to find her, first of all. And at incredible expense, 10 camels, all the stuff, hauls it all out there, wants to make an impression on her. So there's a lot of expense on his part. He makes an incredible effort to be in an environment in which you can find hard-working, dedicated women. This is the thing that frustrates you with kids today. Kids come to me, oh, Pastor, you don't know how hard it is to find a good Christian woman. You don't know how hard it is to find a good Christian guy. So I start asking questions. Do you go to church? Well, church just isn't my thing. Okay. So tell me, what do you do? Friday night, where do you go? Well, kind of hang with my friends. A lot of times we'll hit a bar and then we'll go home. Okay. I'm not saying there's not Christian women at a bar, but I'll tell you what, the field's getting narrower. I blow glass. I love blowing glass. I can talk for hours about somebody. If I find another glass blower, I can sit down. We could talk for 5-6 hours about glass stuff. Let's say I want to talk to glass people, and I came to you and said, you know what? I can't find anybody to talk to about glass. And you said, well, where do you go? Well, I go to the demo derbies on Friday nights. I'm not saying there's not a glass person in demo derby, but you know what? The field's probably pretty small. Well, I do the races on Saturday night. Well, you know what? And they look at me and go, how about going to an art museum? All of a sudden, my odds increase. Why? Because there's probably art people at an art museum. Where do you think you're going to find Christian people? In Christian circles. Now, that's not why you go. Again, you're going because you're building up your own spiritual wall, but that's where your odds are going to increase. His odds of finding a godly, hardworking, dedicated, compassionate woman, Christian woman, godly woman, are going to be much better at the well than they are someplace else in town. And he's smart enough to do that. And one of the things that you see is you've got to put yourself in an environment. You go, well, it's expensive. I got to drive all the way to Omaha. I got to drive all the way to Sioux Falls. Okay, so what's it worth to you? What's finding a good, solid Christian spouse worth to you? Because I'll tell you what, it's going to take you some time. It's going to take you some money. It's going to take you some involvement. It's going to take you some commitment. How important is it? Because I guarantee you, Satan will make sure there's an alternative in front of you that's easier, cheaper, quicker, not. The second you're dating somebody and you find that they are pulling your spiritual life down or minimizing your spiritual life, get away as fast as you can. Get away as fast as you can. Because you need Christ at the center of your life in the spiritual walk, in your marriage. The last thing, and this is the thing some of you are going to have a really hard time with, but it's between you and God. My job to preach it, your job's to do with it whatever you want. I give an account for what I say. You give an account for what you do. I want to go back to this verse for a second. I want you to pay very close attention to this verse. the last verse here at the end. The servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her to the tent of his mother Sarah. He married Rebekah. She became his wife, and he loved her. Did you catch that? By the way, this is the first time in the Bible love is connected to marriage. Notice the order. Married her, wife, loved her. Love came after. Why? Because love is not a feeling, it's not an emotion, it's not a mud pit you fall into and jump out of. Love is a commitment and a decision that you make. It is an act of your will. We in American culture put love first. Well, I loved her and I married her. No. I'm glad you loved her. But you have to put love as a commitment, not an emotion and not a feeling. Let me walk you through it biblically. First of all, practically. My wife and I in December will have been married 40 years, okay? You think every day for 40 years I get up and think, how excited I am to put my wife first today. Not on your life. There are days I don't even like me, much less her. But love is not a feeling. It's not an emotion. I mean, it can have that with it, but that's not what it is. It is a commitment. It is a commitment that I am going to put your needs in front of mine. It's a commitment that says, I'm going to put you ahead of me. Biblically, what does Jesus do? We are sinners. We do not deserve salvation. We do not deserve grace. God looks at us and says, I love you. I am committed to you. I will give my life for you. Why? Because he loves us. He puts us in front of him. Isn't that what 1 John says? We love him because he first loved us? What if it was a feeling for God? What if it was an emotion? What if it was based on how we treat God? No, love's a commitment. God committed to love us. In this story, he loves Rebekah. And the reason that he loves Rebekah is because he commits to Rebekah. I don't know where you are in your marriage, but you need to understand this. You have to put the needs of your spouse in front of you. That's genuine love. You sit there and think about ways that you can put their needs in front of yours. That's love. And it's a struggle every single day because every one of us is born selfish. And we want to do, well, I'm not going to do that because you know what? She didn't do that for me. I mean, I don't understand why she won't put the toilet paper roll back on. And if she's not going to put have you ever seen Everybody Loves Raymond, that deal with the suitcase? I think that's the greatest deal. I'm not going to put the suitcase away. I'll see how long it takes her to put the suitcase away. She goes, I'm not going to put the suitcase away. I'm going to see how long it takes him to put the suitcase away. And they walk around this suitcase on the staircase for weeks trying to figure out who's going to pick it up and do it. Pick up the suitcase. It's not that hard. Put their needs in front of you. Put their needs in front. Look, we live on a country road. You know how hard it is to keep a car clean on a country road? Okay. My wife wanted to take the Mustang. This was a big week for her. She got to take the Mustang. They wanted to drive it in a parade. So it was like, they want to take my Mustang. She got to drive it with two kids who were part of the senior relative that she had as a kindergarten teacher. So the kindergarten teacher driving two kids, they've been in school 12 years, graduate, sitting on the back, and da-da-da. So it was like, and I'm like, it's a Mustang on a gravel road. You know how hard it is to get that thing clean. I spent 3 hours this week waxing it, shining it up. You know why? Because it was important to her. It was important to her. Fortunately, somebody was smart enough and wise enough to tell her how nice her car looked. And they said, even the tires were shiny. Like, you bet the tires were shiny. You know how hard it is to get tires shiny on a gravel road? And keep them that way till you get it to the city so she can drive it in a parade? Why? Committed to love her. Put her first. Not about what I think about the car and dust. It's about what she thinks. It's a little thing, but that's what we're talking about. Parenting, marriage, love. Makes important lessons for us in this story. So I end this morning with this. The idea here is that we're given some insight into parenting, marriage, and love. As parents, we have to teach and live out our biblical principles in front of our kids. We have to remember that being married requires our spiritual walk to be centered on Christ and not ourselves. If you choose to love someone, you put their needs in front of yours. And you follow the example that Christ set. Let's pray. Lord, help us. God, each of us, just as for those of us that are married, love a spouse, we need to show our love and commitment to you as well. So help us do that this week. For those that are parenting, Lord, give them the wisdom, the insight, the protection they need. For those that are married, Lord, in this selfish, self-centered world, would you help us to put the needs of our spouse in front of our own? And Lord, for all of us, may we understand that love is not this emotional feeling that our society so often talks about, but rather, Lord, it's a commitment. It's a commitment, Lord, to put other people and you in front of what we want to do. So help us to do that. And when it is all said and done, Lord, may you receive the honor and the glory and the praise. These things we ask.